How are we responding to this crisis? Well, because our mental health system has failed so miserably, we've turned it into a criminal justice system, which is why you're here today. In America today, law enforcement officers deal with more persons with psychiatric problems than psychiatrists do. Law enforcement deal with more persons with mental illness than psychologists and therapists. The average police officer in a day sees more mentally disturbed persons than a social worker. This is why CIT is so important. During my travels from community to community, I've seen the same pattern when it comes to CIT, and I want to share it with you. What happens is there's a tragedy. Usually it's the death of a police officer, and somebody says, wow, we got to do something. And so let's start CIT. And in the beginning, there's resistance, there's frowns, there's arms like this. We're going to do, as my friend Ron Homburg says, hug-a-thug programs. And then the training starts, and all of a sudden those doubting attitudes disappear, and people get fired up, and CIT takes off. Now, at that point, a curious phenomenon appears in communities that fully embrace CIT as envisioned by Sam Cochran. CIT-trained officers begin to say, hey, I don't like dropping a psychotic person off at the emergency room where they're going to be shut out the door in a few minutes. I don't like taking them to jail. Hey, why don't we have a single drop-off center where we could go and drop off people and they could actually get plugged in? And then CI officers say, hey, why should we bring people into a jail here when they don't need to be in a jail? Why don't we have a diversion program? That'd be a good idea. Let's divert them out. And then somebody goes, hey, why do we have them go in regular court? Why don't we get a mental health court going? And then somebody says, hey, look at this. Why are we taking people who are homeless and psychotic and we bring them in jail and then we throw them back out on the streets and they're back? Why don't we find out when they're in jail if they have a mental health problem, and then let's line them up with treatment. Let's actually have a reentry program. Hey, what about that? Wouldn't that save money? And that, my friends, is how CIT is literally revolutionizing the criminal justice system. That's how it starts. That's what it leads to. And that's the real impact of CIT. Now, I'm going to put on that advocate's hat, because I'm going to tell you that doesn't happen in every community. During my travels, I've been places and met with leaders who don't think CIT is important. They don't think it's a good idea, and they don't get it. And when I meet them, I always leave sad, because I know what's going to happen. I know it's going to take someone dying, either a person with mental illness or a loved one or an officer, before those people wake up. I've also seen CIT taking a foothold in a community and everybody getting excited, and then a year or two later it fails. And when that happens and you go back into that community, it's always the same reason why CIT has failed. You can have the best intentioned CIT officers in this nation, the finest people. You can have a Sam Cochran. But if you don't have any meaningful treatment and recovery services, if you don't have any adequate medications, no acute hospital beds to help people who are in crisis, no longer-term beds where people can go and get help and become stable before they come back to the community, no peer-to-peer, no evidence-based recovery, no job programs, no certified community access teams, and no housing, then you are cutting CIT off at the knees, and it's not going to work. You see, CIT is a spoke, but it's a spoke in a bigger wheel. Mental illness does not stand alone. Mental illness is a housing issue. It is a veterans issue. It is a transportation issue. It is a juvenile justice issue. It is a school board issue. It's an employment issue. It's a Medicaid issue. It's a Medicare issue. It's an emergency medicine issue. And it's a family welfare issue. And unless all these folks come together, you're not going to get that wagon to move forward. Which brings me to you. What can you do? First, never underestimate the power of one person to change an entire community. My friends, I have seen that happen. Go to Fort Wayne, Indiana. There's a doctor there whose son committed suicide by cop. Instead of regretting and wallowing in pity, he set up a clubhouse program that helps people with mental illness get jobs. He has changed that community. Margaret Mead said it best when she said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." What can you do? When you go back to your communities from this conference, tell your colleagues about CIT. Tell them that mental disorders can strike anyone, that people who are sick need treatment, not incarceration. I recently spoke in Oregon to 150 judges. Afterwards, 5 of them came up to me. These were judges. Their sons were in jails and prisons because they could not get help. 1 out of every 5 families is affected by mental illness. It does not discriminate. It touched my family. It can touch yours. What can you do? Go back to your communities and give your local and state politicians a kick in the butt. Those of you in law enforcement have more political clout than those of us in the mental health people. People care about public safety. They don't care about another social welfare program. And during these tough economic times, everybody's going to say, "We don't have any money. We can't afford any new programs." Okay, that's fine. Then you line that politician up and you say, "Do you know how much money you're wasting on programs that don't work?" The last time I checked, there were 1,200 inmates in the Miami County jail. 1,200 inmates. They were costing that city $100,000 a day, $36 million a year, and they weren't getting any better. And you could put an ACT team and housing in there and actually help those people for half that price. Direct the money from jails and prisons and crisis-driven services, homeless shelters, emergency room, into life-saving services such as supportive housing. And in the end, you will save money, and it's a much more humane approach than what we're doing now. Tell your politicians, this is a good one, tell your politicians that there are costs associated with mental illness that you have no idea about. Let me give you an example. The Washington Post decided to look up to see who did the most 911 calls, okay? And because we live in Washington and we're so efficient, every 911 call costs an average of $700. All right, $700 for a 911 call, according to the Washington Post. The number one person making calls more than 200 a year was a man with schizophrenia who often called because he wanted to ride somewhere and he was lonely. More than $140,000, according to the Post, wasted by untreated mental illness. What can you do? Fight stigma. Tell your stories. Better than anyone else, you see what happens to persons who are sick or dying in the street. Tell their story. Make it aware. You need to get angry, and you need to begin putting pressure on the mental health community to step up to the plate and take charge. I'm worried. You guys are people who you say to someone like you, "Here's a job, here's a problem, solve it," and you solve it. But just remember, getting arrested should not be the first step in getting help in the mental health world. You shouldn't have to get arrested to get help. We need to bring our brothers in mental health along. You also need to get angry for the same reason I'm angry. You know, my son got help from a Fairfax County police detective named Vicki Armel. My son would have ended up in jail if it weren't for her. And a year after my book came out, she was gunned down and killed by a man with untreated mental illness who attacked her police station and killed her and another officer. You have a lot to stake. You need to speak up. What can you do? Never give up. Like all parents, I thought my son Mike, oh, he got sick, he'll be fine, he'll move on. And after he got off probation, he did great. He got a job, he was Employee of the Month. And as soon as his probation ended, he stopped taking his medication. And I called up, Fairfax County has a mobile crisis response team. And I called it up and I said, my son's off his medication, he's sick. And they said, whoa, is he dangerous? And I said, no, but let me tell you what happened last time. They said, you can't judge him on the past. You call him if he gets dangerous. The night my son became dangerous, the night I didn't have to lie, I called the police. There was no CIT trained officer available. So an officer came over. My son was shot twice with a taser and hogtied and taken away. Now, there's a reason why I'm telling you that story. If I couldn't help my son after spending 3 years investigating our system, writing a book about it with my Washington Post connections, my Mike Wallace connections, and my money in education, what chance do you think someone has who has no education, no connections, no knowledge of the mental health situation? Since that horrible night, I'm happy to report my son has found his way back. Today, he's working full-time. He's living in a group home. He's been symptom-free for 3 years, and just in the last few months, he's finished peer-to-peer specialist training, and he now is going into jails and talking to people with mental illness and helping them get out. And I'm proud of him. All right, you've been very patient. I know you expected just to come in here and talk, and you have this guy yelling at you, so I'm going to finish here, okay? And I'm going to give you a warning. I want to be politically correct. I am from Washington. I'm about to mention a religious story. I am not promoting religion. I'm not against religion. I just like this story, and I want to share it with you because I believe in the bottom of my heart that CIT is a calling. Now, you may know this story. I grew up in Oklahoma. My father was a minister. He used to drag me to church. I used to get really good at sitting there with my eyes closed, listening to him. But he always told one story that woke me up. And that's because it was about a woman having sex. Now, those stories are in the Bible. You just got to know where to look to find them, okay? This woman is caught having sex. She's dragged into the center of the community. Notice it's always women who commit adultery in the Bible. Dragged into the center of the community. They're going to stone her. They're going to kill her because of this terrible thing she's done. And Jesus steps up and he says, "Let ye who has never sinned throw that very first stone." And one by one, the people put down the stones, according to the Bible. They drop them and they walk away because they realize that all of us have sinned. All of us are guilty. None of us is pure. Unfortunately, I believe we live in a society today where people don't put down those rocks. They don't put down those stones. They want to punish people who are different. They want to condemn people who don't fit in, people with mental illnesses and disorders. They're afraid of them. They want to drive them away. And as you know better than anyone else, they want to lock them up and throw away the key. As CIT officers, as instructors, and persons who care about mental illness, I believe you are called on to be what I call stone catchers. People who step between that angry mob and people who can't defend themselves. And you catch those stones until these people can join you and work with you. And it's the stone catchers in our society who give me hope. My son has a mental illness. To me, this illness wears a very human face. And I will always be tremendously grateful to people such as you who can look beyond the madness in his eyes and see a person of worth with brothers and sisters and parents who love him. So thank you for coming to this conference. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for dedicating your life to public service and justice. Thank you for being a stone catcher. I can guarantee what you are doing here today will save and change lives. So thank you.